What's up, everyone? So this video is going to be a little bit different from what we normally do on this channel. We're going to take it a little bit more personal and talk about my family's recent trip to Hungary. So in this video, we're going to talk about the reasons why we went on the trip and some of the activities that we did while we were in country. So full disclosure, this was not our first trip to Hungary. We actually lived in Hungary for 6 weeks 4 years ago as we were going through the adoption process for our son Kevin. So Kevin was born in Hungary, and he was there for the first 3 years of his life until we came and adopted him and brought him home with us to the United States. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail behind Kevin's adoption story, mostly because I believe that that is his story to tell when he is old enough and ready to do so. So I don't want to be the one that starts sharing that story if that's not something that he eventually would want to be told. But just for a little bit of a background, so that this video makes a little bit more sense, he lived with a wonderful foster family in Hungary for most of the 3 years that he lived there. And by that I mean he lived with his birth mother for 3 months, and then after he was 3 months old, he moved in with his foster family and stayed with that same family from the time he was 3 months old all the way till he was 3 years old when we adopted him. So why did we decide to go back to Hungary after 4 years? Well, some of you may have been involved with an adoption in your own life or in your family or even in your friends, or just know someone that has gone through an adoption. You'll know that adoptions can be beautiful and life-changing and wonderful, but also can be very traumatic for both the adoptive child and for the family that they're being brought into. And so one of the most important things that we wanted to do for our son is to make sure that he had a sense of identity and belonging as he matured. And to do that, we thought that it was very important for him to embrace both his American culture that he's being brought up in, but as well as his Hungarian roots and his Hungarian culture where he was born. And both of those things combined give him a very unique story that is unique to just him, and that's something that he can be proud of and not be ashamed of being adopted, but being proud of having the opportunity to grow up both in Hungary and in the United States. And so that's why we wanted to go back to Hungary and go back relatively frequently, as much as we can throughout his upbringing, so that he can have cultural connections with Hungary, as well as building relationships so that he can get a sense of identity as he matures. So let's talk a little bit about the travel itself. So we left on a Monday at around 1:30 in the afternoon. Our first flight was from Charleston to Newark, which is a relatively short flight, maybe like hour and a half, 2 hours flight. And it's not too bad. Everybody was in pretty good shape after that flight. After Newark, we flew into Vienna, Austria. It was a very nice flight over. We flew Austrian Airlines over, and no complaints there. It was really nice. Everything was brokered through United, and so it was very nice. I enjoyed the flight. It was about a 7.5 hour flight over out of Newark to Vienna, and then from Vienna into Budapest. So total flight time was about total travel time was about 17 hours from Charleston into Budapest. The problem, if you're familiar with kind of that flight path, is that you leave. We left in the afternoon and in the Eastern Standard Time, and we arrived in the morning the next day. Now, I don't really particularly care to fly all that much, and so I don't really fly that well, so I don't sleep on the plane. So that meant for me, I went from one day right into the next morning without any sleep. So I was up for 36 hours or so without sleep. I don't think my wife slept very much either. Kevin, our son, slept a little bit, but again, it was most of us running on fumes. So after that flight, which again went about as well as you could expect for a transatlantic 17-hour flight, we were pretty much done. So that was Monday going into Tuesday, and we pretty much didn't do anything on Tuesday, but just have some downtime to relax and recover. So then we come to Wednesday. Wednesday was our first full day in Budapest. The apartment that we were staying in was absolutely perfect and wonderful in every way. It was an Airbnb that we rented for like the first 5 or 6 days. I can't remember exactly. While we were in Budapest, before we went out on some other excursions that we'll talk about. The apartment was almost dead in the middle of everything that you wanted to be a part of in Budapest. So that was, it made it really easy to get into like the train station, the metro station, the tram station. The public transportation around Budapest was absolutely wonderful. We got a 72-hour metro pass, and it covered pretty much everything apart from the bus trip from the airport into downtown and back. Everything else was covered. We could go pretty much anywhere we wanted for that 72-hour period. And day one on Wednesday, we decided to get a quick win for everybody in the family, and we would go to the Budapest Zoo. So if you're watching this video and you haven't seen it already, I'll link to a video that I did for the Budapest Zoo. It is an absolutely wonderful zoo. I am so impressed. I cannot recommend it more. If you are in Hungary, in Budapest, it is definitely worth the time to go and check out the Budapest Zoo. But if you aren't planning a trip to Budapest, you can check out the video and get some of the more details of what they have and the kinds of exhibits. My big takeaway from the zoo is that everything that I saw appeared to be really healthy. A lot of the animals that I saw appeared to be very mature animals, which is something that I don't know that I've noticed in the past, but some of them look like they had been there. Like the Budapest Zoo talked about having animals, like they said they had the second longest alligator in captivity in the world. They were really proud of their longevity of their animals and their health in captivity, which I thought was really cool. The exhibits themselves were massive for the most part. There wasn't anything, like most zoos that I go to, I'm like, okay, that enclosure could have been a little bit better, or could have been a little bit different. There wasn't anything that I really noticed that was like, wow, this needs to be improved. They were all very well done. They were all massively oversized to the best that they could. The architecture was stunning. There were wildflowers everywhere. It was just a really nice environment. So could not recommend going to the Budapest Zoo anymore. It took all day. The zoo itself is massive. It took us all day. We were there almost when it opened to, I think we had 10 minutes left before it closed, that we were making the last couple of stops at exhibits before we had to go. So day one was a pretty big success and a great way to start off the trip. Day two was a little bit more of a wild card. So we let my son pick one activity that he wanted to do. Now he's 7 years old, and so we expected him to pick something that was like the Children's Museum or something a little bit geared towards kids. He decided that he would go with the Labyrinth under Buda Castle. And I'll give you a quick kind of rundown of what the Labyrinth is, and then I have a couple of videos and pictures that I'll post that you can see the actual Labyrinth itself. But just as a summation, the Labyrinth is a connected channel of underground passages and caves underneath the Buda Castle hill. So it's the old castle on top of like the hill overlooking modern Budapest, and it's overlooking the Danube River. It's absolutely beautiful. But these labyrinth they're underground passages, and they were originally created to be cellars and bomb shelters way back in the day, and then they were also used as prisons and hospitals throughout their history. So a lot of uses for these passages, but I mean, It's this dark, dreary, damp cave, lots of fog and, very little light. And that's what my son wanted to do. He's kind of into like the spooky thriller kind of stuff. And so I'm not surprised that he picked that one, but I was expecting him to go to a different direction. But one of the other fun myths is that they say that Vlad the Impaler, who is the inspiration for Bram Stoker's Dracula, was imprisoned in the Labyrinth. Now that unfortunately is not true. He was actually imprisoned about 25 miles away in another castle in Hungary. But it's a fun story that they tell, and they had some like thematic elements behind that inside the Labyrinth. But the Labyrinth itself, I was kind of surprised. I didn't really have any expectations at all, really. I didn't know what we were going to get into. I thought it was a pretty darn good time. There wasn't anything that was negative about the experience, other than it wasn't open when we tried to go in initially. And which was disappointing to my son because he thought we weren't going to get to go. It said it was going to open at 10:30 in the morning, and we went right around, 11 o'clock or so. So right after it should have opened, and it wasn't open. So we walked around, we let him play on a playground for about an hour. We came back around noon, and it was open, so we were able to go in. But other than that, it was a pretty fun experience. A little spooky. There was some dense fog sections that were pretty cool. And I thought it was a pretty good time. So I would definitely recommend the Labyrinth under Buda Castle if you are in Budapest. The next day, which happened to be our last day in Budapest, we decided to go to the thermal baths, which is a big cultural thing in Hungary, and it's something that we wanted Kevin to experience while we were there. The thermal bath that was closest to us was actually on Margaret Island, which is an island that's in the middle of the Danube River, and it's just right in the center of downtown Budapest, which is really cool. Margaret Island itself is pretty isolated. It's like a park. It's got some gardens and a petting zoo in it, and then the thermal baths are all the way at the end of the island, and the thermal baths are like a naturally occurring hot spring that's coming up, and they have just tons of pools. In this complex, there were probably 6 or 7 different pools. They had one like Olympic-sized swimming pool, which was just like normal temperature. They're all outdoors, except for they had like 2 small indoor pools for the wintertime. But then the thermal baths, and then most of the pools are outside. The Olympic-sized swimming pool, and then one or two like a kid's pool, and then like just an adult relaxing pool were just normal pool temperatures. So they mixed the thermal water with regular cold water to create like a balanced temperature. But then they had natural thermal pools as well that you could go in. And it was just a fun experience. It's just one of those experiences that is really unique and very Hungarian, and it's something that I'm really glad that we got to experience while we were there. And so the next 3 days were really centered around going to visit Kevin's foster family. We were lucky enough to still be in contact with his foster family and let them know that we were going to be visiting Hungary, and they agreed to meet with us and see him. They were very excited about it, actually. And so we had to travel from Budapest to the city where we lived while we were there 4 years ago, for the most part, which was the city of Nyíregyháza, which is about 2.5 hours drive from Budapest. Nyíregyháza is in the kind of northeast of Hungary. Budapest is kind of in the center, and so Nyíregyháza is in the northeast. So it's about 2.5, 3-hour drive. We rented another Airbnb, so we checked out of our really nice Airbnb in Budapest, traveled to Nyíregyháza, stayed in another Airbnb, which was also very nice, and then that was kind of our jumping point to go visit his foster family. So his foster family lives in a smaller village, a more rural village, about a little over an hour from Nyíregyháza, and so about 4 hours from Budapest. But there's no real place for us to stay closer than that. So after the day after the thermal baths, we got in the car, we rented a car, drove down there, and pretty much that was the day. We rested up and we got ready because we knew the next day was going to be an emotional one. It was going to be a tiring one for all of us involved. So on Sunday, we went and visited Anya, which is Kevin's foster mom. Anya is mom in Hungarian. So my wife is mom to him, but his foster mom will always be Anya. And that's how we can separate them out. So and Appa is dad. So I'm dad, and his foster dad is Appa. So we went to visit Anya and Appa on Sunday. It was an amazing experience. It was an exhausting experience. It was a rewarding experience. It was an emotional experience from everybody. So I'm not going to get into too much detail, again, because this is really not my story to tell. I'm telling experiences from our trip to Hungary, and not so much from the adoption side on this episode. So that'll be something that will come later with my son if he decides to tell that story. But it was really a pleasure seeing Anya and Appa again. It was they prepared so much food. They had so many gifts for us. It was just I can't speak enough of the hospitality of those two people, and their willingness to give homes to children in need. So they had actually brought in two other foster children after Kevin had left that they've been raising for the past 3 or 4 years or so. And it's just amazing, their generosity and their willingness to help kids. Their willingness to help us while we're there. It was an amazing experience. We spent 7 or 8 hours there on Sunday. We left exhausted. We left fulfilled. All of those things. They were very appreciative of us coming to visit. They said they wanted us to come back whenever we had the opportunity, which of course we will, whenever we're able to get back to Hungary here in the next couple of years. But just a magnificent visit. So after we left Anya's house, we went back to Nyíregyháza again and spent the night there. So Saturday night and Sunday night we spent in Nyíregyháza. On Monday, we traveled back to Budapest because we were going to fly out Tuesday from Budapest. So we had to travel from Nyíregyháza back to Budapest. But on the way back, we were actually able to go see the house that we stayed in for 6 weeks while we were in Hungary the last time, which was pretty cool. We didn't get to go inside or anything. We don't know. It was a house for rent when we lived there 4 years ago. It seems to be that somebody has bought that house since that time. So we don't know who owns the house or anything like that, but we just took some weird pictures out in front of the house. People probably thought we were crazy, but it doesn't matter. I'll throw some pictures up somewhere to show you the house, and it was a really fun experience to see that house. It was really nostalgic. So back to Budapest we go, and this is kind of where things started to unravel. Everything had gone way too well for the trip up to this point. So it was a matter of time that something happened that was not to our favor. So we went to the hotel, checked into the hotel. Kevin and I stayed at the hotel, and my wife went and took the car back to the airport, which is where we rented it from. And she was going to use, the hotel had a free shuttle to get back to the hotel from the airport. Well, that didn't go nearly as according to plan. Everything was fine with Kevin and myself. We checked into the hotel. It was fine. But my wife went and dropped the car off. She couldn't find any, the office was closed. It was like, I don't know, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock on a Monday. The Hertz office was closed. There was nobody in like the drop-off area, even though that's when we said we were going to drop it off. Our like appointment was at 3. it was crazy. So she just kind of like left the car where she thought it was supposed to be. She finally found somebody, got it taken care of, but that was a whole ordeal. Then she tried to call the hotel to get the shuttle to come pick her up, and none of the numbers were working. And then she had sent an email previously. They hadn't replied to her, so she actually called a taxi to take her back. The taxi, even though she used the app and put in where she wanted to go, the taxi wanted to take her to downtown Budapest, not to the hotel that was like 2 miles away, because he wanted more fare. So he refused the service. So she was back to square one again, and she ended up having to pay for a shuttle that was like a group shuttle to take her. It was going downtown, but it would stop off pretty much wherever you wanted and drop you off. And so she was able to get a group shuttle to take her back. But that was like after 2 hours of trying to get a ride back and forth from the hotel. So that was quite the ordeal. We spent the night on Monday night in the airport hotel in Budapest. It was a fine hotel. I mean, it doesn't really compare to the 2 Airbnbs, but I guess it was a hotel and not an apartment. So there's that. And then we got up and we started the journey back home. So this was kind of the reverse journey. So as I mentioned earlier, when you're flying from the United States into Hungary, you kind of like lose a night. So we went from day to day. This time it was day the whole time. So we went from 1 o'clock. No, what time did we leave? 9:30. The flight left Budapest, and then it landed at 9:30 at night. But it was an 18-hour travel time. So it was only 12 hours on the clock, but we had the 6-hour time difference to account for. So 18 hours total, and everybody was exhausted. Everybody was just completely done. And so it was a pretty difficult plane ride and stints in the airport. And of course, the last flight. So we went from, the return trip was from Budapest to Frankfurt, Germany, and then from Frankfurt into Chicago O'Hare, and then from Chicago to Charleston. So of course, the last flight, the Chicago to Charleston flight, which should have been the easiest, it was an 1.5-hour flight, should have been no problem, was delayed by an hour. So at that point, and an hour, I mean, I've had flights that are delayed 6, 7, 8 hours. Okay, so an hour is not that big of a deal. But when you're on the tail end of an 18-hour flight and you're an 1.5 hours away to get home, and somebody tells you that you got to wait another hour, almost twice as long as what you thought you were going to have, it was pretty demoralizing. So luckily, Kevin fell asleep literally on the last plane as it was taxiing for takeoff. He is a heavy sleeper, so he slept through takeoff, the whole flight, and through when we landed in Charleston. And we had to wake him up to get off the plane after everyone started getting their bags and getting off. So it was a pretty difficult last leg, but we made it. And we are very thankful for the opportunity to have been able to travel to Hungary this time. It was really rewarding. I hope that my son will now take away some of those memories that he might not have remembered when he was 0 to 3. Now that he has those, now that he's 7, I hope that they'll be a little bit more ingrained in his memory, and it'll be something that he can connect with. We do plan on going back to Hungary, hopefully every 5 years, give or take a little bit, because it is a lot on us to go do, and we also want him to experience other cultures and do other things. So we'll travel to, I think what our plan is to do a domestic and an international trip every other year, and make sure that we include Hungary on that 5th year as a trip back. In addition, it's something that my wife has been working on, and I feel moved to do as well, is to try and learn a little bit more Hungarian. The language, the Hungarian people are very proud of their language. It's something that has been with them for a very long time throughout their history, through many occupations, and many changes in government and things like that, that they've been able to hold on to their language. And so I think that's something that would be really cool to pass along to Kevin as he grows up. My wife does a little bit better than I do currently. She has been studying Hungarian for a while. She's able to communicate reasonably well on a basic level. But we're starting to implement things into our daily lives so that Kevin gets some of that language, and gets to maintain some of that culture that's a big part of their language in Hungary. So I hope you enjoyed this trip recap. It was a really pleasurable experience for us. We're really glad to be home, to have some of the creature comforts that we're used to in the U.S. Not that Hungary doesn't have those, but certain things that you're used to within your own life, like my bed, my comfort level of accessing food and driving and things like that. We're very thankful to be back, but we do look forward to being able to go back to Hungary again here in the hopefully near future. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like, share, subscribe, and we'll catch you again, hopefully with some coffee or animal related content on the next video.